All right. Hello to everybody that is tuning in with us tonight with the Coach's Corner. I hope everybody's had a lovely Friday so far, and we have a wonderful episode for everybody tonight. Just a few words as we're all getting settled in. Feel free to ask questions. Just drop them in the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye out for that and passing that off. And if for some reason we can't get to your questions, head over to the Coach's Corner because they're amazing. So with that being said, I am going to pass this off to Duke Brannos.
Hi, folks. Welcome to our Coach's Corner Friday night. Tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about, we call it starting late, or actually ages.
What was that? Just a number. Age is just a number.
And we're going to cover both young and old and maybe some time through it. You're going to get a chance to hear some people's experiences and so on. Tonight, we have Duke Sean, which is one of our normal coaches. We have Duke Ronald back. He actually was one of the persons that helped really define this episode, and that he really kind of threw it out there and said, hey, why don't we cover this? So we asked him back to cover the things he wanted to cover. And we have Sir Rauokinn, also one of our newest coaches here on Coach's Corner. So welcome to the group. And I'm Duke Brannos, and I hope we entertain you a bit tonight. I'm sure you'll hear the stories, but you know, the biggest thing we want to get through is to make sure that everybody understands that sometimes we look at age as something that restricts us, and it's not always that way. You know, obviously it lays down some barriers both early in life and late in life. So the idea is to recognize those barriers and to essentially accommodate for those, and to remember that you know, there's a lot of benefits starting early or starting late, and I think that's the piece that we really want to cover. So I think the first part we're going to start here is we're going to start with, you know, essentially starting early. And the good part is we got two people here, and Rauokinn, you can tell me, you know, when did you start fighting?
I started in law school, so I was probably, I don't know, 25.
Okay. I started probably at, I'm trying to remember exactly, like 21. But the good part is, Ronald, when did you start?
I started going to practices when I was 13. I authorized right after my 14th birthday. That plus the fact that I was in the Bay Area where I had Radnor, Sagan, a number of other Paul, a number of other people who could train me. That's a lot of what led to my early success. You know, I was probably the youngest ever Prince of the Miss and one of the younger Kings of the West. I was 20 when I won Western Crown and 18 when I won Miss Coronet. So yeah, I had a really good running start, you know, rather than natural talent.
John?
Well, you see, it's like this. So I started doing Pell work when I was 12, maybe not quite 13 years old. You know, I had very good mechanics taught to me by Duke Bryan right off the bat. Mechanics that are virtually unaltered from what I teach today, and mechanics that are very kind to your body, which I think helps with a lot of the longevity. But yeah, I was doing Pell work when I was 13. And the first time I set foot on the fighting field was at Estrella 1 in 1985, and I was 14 and a half. And that was at a time like with Ronald where the minimum fighting age was still 14, and then 6 months after I turned 16, they changed it over to 16. So yeah, we both got started early, and I don't know about Ron, but you know, again, I did Pell work for about a year and a half before I actually set foot on the fighting field.
Same here.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference too.
Oh, it does. Well, especially because I had Paul Veltrux coming to my local practice every week, you know, and training and doing a basic body mechanics course. I mean, he was showing how to throw a snap and offsides and all that. So I went to every class he taught for like a year. So, and that was a huge help.
So I guess it's part of what we kind of were going to cover is, one of the big pieces, I think, and we're lucky around here, we kind of modified our youth practice specifically to make sure, we have BOFR and ESCA now, obviously. But we have to, I think there's our foam fighting, however you want to count it. But I think one of the big pieces here is that in some ways, it runs totally separate from the heavy community. And, that's not necessarily terrible, but when you hit those ages in the teens, when you do want to compete and it does matter, it starts becoming a little bit more difficult. So for us, we tend to have a lot of crossover into the kids group. Almost everyone in our group, everyone is kind of pushed, every heavy fighter is pushed to get their youth fighting authorization. In other words, they can go fight the youths and they're supposed to understand the rules. We have half a dozen of the heavy fighters, including myself, that are marshals, youth marshals as well. And then a number of people that have background checks as well. So that at any given time, any one of the kids can come over and literally, we have a big enough area that they can come over and ask to fight us, just like if they were an adult coming over and asking to fight us. They just bring a BOFR sword with us and we transition and we train them like we would train any other adult. And that's the piece I think is a little different, is that, my expectation is they came over to work with me, they're going to work. But in that point, we're going to try to make it fun for them. We're going to try to make that, we try to keep it focused. We're going to try to make it exciting. We're going to try to make the education of what we do exciting, so they want to continue on. They need a little bit more feedback a lot of times than an older adult who has made a commitment to come and do something for himself, compared to, as a kid, that excitement is still a big part of what they work on. So, and I don't know about you two, we'll start with Ron on this, but Ron, you were just saying that, you have a lot of great instructors. Did they really, did they spend that first? Did they spend that time with you? Did they make practice still fun and focused and exciting? What made you as a really young adult, lean into the heavy side of fighting and successful?
Well, first off, in 1978, there was no youth fighting program.
Yeah.
Youth fighting was basically fighting the adults. I was actually able to fight in Crown at that point. The West Kingdom Crown had no age restriction, so I fought in Crown at 14 and got pretty thoroughly hammered. But what actually made it fun was the fact that Paul ran a very well-structured practice. The training part was, as you would imagine Paul would do, very much like a dojo. So he made you feel like you were part of the dojo. And he also had the patience of Job. I was not a quick study. And he just kept at it with me. So the fact that I had an early trainer that was that engaged with me on learning and learning it correctly, and not just in power generation, but also in ergonomics, which the way Paul teaches the fight is a fairly body friendly way to fight.
Well, Brannos is on mute.
Sorry, Sean, did you want to go ahead and cover what's next?
Yeah, there's a question that I responded to about the mechanics that I use. At the time that Brian started teaching me mechanics, the body mechanics was a very new thing in our area. Folks like Paul had been teaching that for a number of years, but it was still relatively new in our area. Before that, it was kind of, this is what a flat snap sort of looks like. But Brian was the first person to put like the science of stick mechanics behind what I was doing. And, I didn't know this until just recently, but Brian had recently told me that I was the first person he taught it to, and he didn't know that it was going to work. So I was kind of his experiment to find out whether or not it was going to work. And, here we are some 35 years later. And the only thing that I've done with regards to how I teach that is I explain the physics behind the stick mechanics. Brian told me what what your body does to make this, but again, it was in our region, the Salt Lake City area in 1983. This was all very new. And so I was very fortunate early on to just have good solid body mechanics, and add to that, I mean, I'm sure Ron was the same way, skinny little 12-year-old kid. I didn't have the muscle to put behind the stick to be able to hit harder. I couldn't just be stronger. So I had to have good mechanics to make the sword do what I wanted it to do, to be able to hit hard enough. So I had to have good mechanics. And, that's one of the things that has really carried me. That's a big part of my longevity, is the fact that I've just had good mechanics from the beginning. And when you run into people that are kind of later in life where they've done other things, or they're just stronger and they can put more muscle behind it, and they don't have to learn the mechanics, when time comes around later where you have to relearn how to do things because of an injury, you're kind of starting from scratch on that.
Rivkin, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So we do something similar to you, Brannos. We have youth that are almost aging into heavy, that they'll just bring an extra foam sword, and we'll just put them into the rotation. One of the guys at practice actually had two twins that we did that with for quite a long time, actually. And we'll even do that sometimes, like for invitational tournaments or something, like one of the Roses invitationals. I think one of Steer Car's kids was invited to it, and anybody who fought him had to fight with a buff sword. So we do try to do that. I would love to see us do more page stuff. And then I would love to see the Knights take a more active role in the tournaments, the youth tournaments at events. I think that could be a really good thing to transition people, to show that we're invested and that we're approachable. I know that when I've made the effort to give someone a favor in a youth tournament, it makes a big difference. So I think that's super important.
So Rifkin, do you guys have the youth tournaments that are in like 14 to 16 where they can actually use rattan? And is it full rattan, or is it like rattan core swords with foam?
I am not sure, but it's not full rattan. I know that there's foam on them.
Okay.
So I know for us at 16, you can start using, what I have found is at 16, you can start using rattan. But, Quill kind of got caught, Duke Quill out of Eldamere got caught in this space where he was competing at such a high level, and the 16 and 17-year-olds were transitioning in some kingdoms. And so he really didn't have a lot of people to fight. The biggest piece that he did was he was really kind of a mentor to a lot of the other kids at the time, because he was early in the youth program, and he would still come out to some other stuff and kind of get fighting on the side. I kind of look, and I should have grabbed him, but I think it's hard on those 16, 17-year-olds. And so that's the reason he was one of those guys that really made me think about how we need to approach it. Because I had a lot of kids that came out, hit that 18, and they were hard foam fighters all the way to 18, and then they were done because their technique was very difficult to transition. They weren't prepared to fight at that level of intensity. They weren't prepared to fight in harness. So they had this really, really rough time transitioning. We thought we were going to go in with youth combat and be like, oh my God, we got the next generation of fighters. But I'm not sure we saw that. And I think we have to do a better job at integrating that to rebuild that fighting community, because they are good fighters. It's kind of like, hey, I'm coming out of middle school and I'm jumping into high school. And it's that break in there, that difference is so huge. It's very hard to get past. And the difference is they don't have to go to high school. They can be like, you know what, I'm done, and they have enough other stuff as an 18-year-old, or I got college, I got, I got, dating, I got all of this other stuff, right? So we gotta find a way to build them up and keep them involved and make what they love, make sure they love what they do into the heavy, because we still may lose them for a period of time. But where we get people back is after they graduate school and they get a job and they're looking, going, I got some time now. What did I love? I miss the SCA because I loved it so much. And then they come back. And I've seen that over and over again. And they come back and they make great SCA members, because these are the people that come back for life. And I think that's super important that we kind of go that way, and that everybody takes a look and see how they can make that youth piece better. I know here foam swords are just part of our life, not only with the kids or, youth combat, but actually in heavy fighting too. We train a lot of foam, and you're going to find that not only all over, we're seeing more and more in the SCA because we push it a lot. We see more and more great fighters in the SCA push it. And if you really want to dig into it, we see more and more steel fighters all across. The Europeans do it all the time. The Russians do it all the time, because the idea, and we'll talk about this later, the idea of just abusing yourself until the end, and that means both being hit and delivering, you take some years off. You have to be careful. So, but on that note, I think we spent a pretty good time on the youth piece. I just, like you guys, and I'm going to call on each one of you to kind of finish up the youth piece. But I think the biggest, for me, the most important part is engaging with them, and making sure they know it's okay to come over and ask, because that's hard for a young kid, especially with people our age, or knights or whoever, is come over and ask for training. If that means you reach out to their parents because the kids are talking for their parents, or if that means reach out to another young kid that you already work with and say, hey, any of the guys that want to, girls and kids that want to come over, doesn't matter, I'm happy to do something. Or if that means, hey, I'm going to run a class over in the youth arena, then that's what it is. And I think that for everybody out there, I think that's important to take a look at your practice and see how you can do it better. Rivkin, what do you think?
I think we right now don't have a youth practice that sort of coincides with our regular practice, and I think it would be great if we did. That would be really great, but we don't. But I do think at events it's really important to introduce yourself to the youth fighters, and support them fighting, and maybe even offer to fight them. And then you establish relationships with kids, with their parents there, which is important. And they know that you're approachable and that you might be available for training outside the event. But I think it's important that we invest more of ourselves at events with the youth tournaments.
Yeah, I think, for our experience, I'm sure Ronald covers some of this too. When we got started fighting, again, I did pel work for about 1.5 years before I started. If the fighting age is, well, it is, the minimum is 16 right now. I know in Eldamere, I think it's 18. And I think in the mid-realm is 18 as well. I'm not sure. But for that time, you get a lot of young kids that look at what we do and they're like, I want to do this. And then you tell them you can't fight till they're 16. And a lot of them have this tendency to say, oh, okay, well, just kind of give up on it. And I've always told those people, like, you can be on the field at 14, at 16, but there's a lot of work that you can do in the next couple of years to prepare yourself for that. We have some youth combat, some buffer stuff in our kingdom. One of the problems that we have is we don't have a large population base, so it's kind of hard to get a large collection of kids that are doing youth fighting for any long period of time consistently. So I think at our local practice we've started having more. I definitely agree with Rivkin that we need to kind of engage that a little bit more, especially as some of the more experienced fighters, to be able to go talk to them and say, look, you can do this just like I did.
Hey, Ron, do you have anything around the kids stuff?
kind of my thoughts on it with younger fighters is that the first thing about it is you got to make it fun for them, because as somebody who started off early on, certain people made it fun for me, which is why I stuck with it. I think we need to encourage more youth combat tournaments, because I see them at Penzic, and I see them a little bit here and there in kingdoms, but there needs to be more of it, because kids want to be heroes. They want to go out and do things and fight, and Sean and I came from an era where you could fight at 14, and I came from a kingdom where you could fight and crown at 14. We, in many kingdoms, partially due to legal reasons, we can't do that anymore, but we got to give the younger fighters as much as we possibly can, because the fact that we've gone from, in the 80s, having royalty in their 20s, and in some cases, like in mine, in their teens, to having somebody who's 35 as a first-time crown winner going, wow, he's young. That's sad. I mean, I remember one time when I was a teenager hearing the royalty going, oh my God, we got to find somebody to go out and buy beer because no one's of legal age to buy beer yet. We don't have that anymore. We have the occasional, Quillum or Xerxes and Callantyr,
right? Yep.
Who won young, but for the most part, the people winning tournaments are an aging population. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would agree.
Add something to answer Duke Dog's question.
Okay, go ahead.
So one way that I include the parents in the process of asking a child if we can fight is I'll say, would you like to do some fights with me using a boffer sword, if it's okay with your mom or dad? And usually their mom and dad's right there, and I make eye contact, and then everybody is on the same page. So that's usually what I do. I think it's super important to make sure that you engage the parents, and you make sure that when you're asking the child to fight, they understand that you're going to fight with a boffer. My daughter thought for the longest time that because we kept asking her if she wanted to do youth fighting, she thought she was going to have to fight her dad and I, and she was really scared. So I think kids, you just got to explain it and include the parents. And I think it's really super easy once you get out there and just do it.
Yeah, I would agree. And for those that are wondering, I mean, obviously we have a couple folks here even talking about it. We started with a youth practice every week, and we found that it was very difficult. And the parents really, the parents have been great at championing the talking to each other and trying to get the same timing going. So what we finally did was made one official youth practice a month, where all the kids knew at the end of the month, which happens to be our Bronio barbecue as well, that was the day. And we have a wonderful marshal that has tubs of stuff he brought out, loaner gear. So we'd get, sometimes 20 kids out fighting. And it was amazing. And it was tons of fun. And then the kids that were really dedicated would come. We're like, hey, we're open. If we have marshals here all the time. So if you want to come, if they have to have their own armor, and if they want to come, we'll still fight them. And so the kids that had that really drive, like Sean and Ron, then they would come every week, and we'd get fights with them. And they knew that they were coming to learn like every other adult. So that's how we handled the kids, and that scenario of making that work in our group. And it actually worked very, very well. So we're going to move on. Everybody's asking, we moved on from, the teens, and we're going to jump a few years to the 40s. But for real, we're not trying to ignore all you guys in the 20s and 30s, but you suck. So we're going to move on to the 40s. But for real, 20s and 30s are great years. They're mostly injury-free for most part. We're really motivated, strong, and healthy, and life is a wonderful thing. We hit our 40s and, and 50s, and we start finding time, and we start finding that we want to engage with more people, and we want to make new friends, and we want to expand our lives more than maybe we have in the 20s and 30s. And here we are. We're like, I want to do a martial art. And I think a lot of people turned the show on when we said age is just a number. They thought, all right, well, this is for older fighters. And it's not. I mean, we just covered a good piece for a half hour about how to engage kids and youth fighters, because it's important. I think it's really important to the society. And it's important to parents that want to participate in the side. But now, I'm going to tell you, 40 starts being rough. And this is, I think, in a lot of ways, the same principles are there. You have to make time for practice, just like a kid. Type of practice becomes important. Does that practice really fit with what you want to do, and does it have the people there that we're really going to help you? Fun, that's still a thing, just like it is a kid. Focus and excitement, those are things. But we also add a number of other things, that makes it important for us. And some of it is conditioning and pushing our boundaries now. A kid pushes their boundaries every minute of the day, and we hit our 40s and 50s. Pushing those boundaries comes harder. And this is what, a good thing that we offer is the martial arts offers in general is being able to push those boundaries, make new friends, make new, relationships, just get out of the norm that we just spent 20, 30 years in. And I think that's the important piece of starting late. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people start late. The hard part here is we were going to try to find somebody that started late. And good part is I know a number of people in my group who, I had somebody in their late 40s start and get knighted in their 50s. And I've had a number of people get knighted in their 50s in our group. And I had a practice where we had 5 65-year-olds fighting on the field at the same time. So, it's not impossible, but there are struggles. So we're going to talk about those a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and start with Ron here, because he's kind of the one that pushed us into this episode a little bit. Ron, you kind of had a list of things. Do you want to go ahead and cover?
Okay. Well, as somebody who's been in this sport for most of the history of the SCA, and has aged through it, I find a few things with getting older in the sport is, one is that you don't heal as quickly. Two is that you're more limited in what you can do. When I was in my 20s, I could throw a lot of things I can't throw now. It's just, let me see if I can explain this. Basically, it gets tougher to get out, get the drive to do this. And that's kind of, and so I've had to adapt myself to the reality that, I've had both my shoulders operated on at this point. I've had 5 knee surgeries, and I've had a number of other procedures done, most of them due to this sport. There's a reason why professional athletes retire in their late 20s and 30s, is that, this kind of thing is tough. And that's mainly what I wanted this to bring out in this discussion, and, there are other things, but, so.
Well, let me go ahead and throw some stuff out here too. I've run into a lot of fighters that, it's true. People are starting to fight later in life these days. A lot of that goes back to what Brannos was talking about earlier, where you get some of the young fighters who had been part of the SCA, and in some cases, as soon as they get a driver's license, they're gone for a decade. But college and new career and all these things and let's face it, World of Warcraft and like so many other things that they can be doing that, quite frankly, are a lot less work. And then somewhere in their late 20s, early 30s, they find it again, and they fall in love with the historical aspect of it. They gain a greater appreciation for martial arts in general, and so maybe they're coming back to it a little bit later. One of the other things that Brannos had kind of mentioned about this being a martial art. The good news about that is martial arts are in many cases after a certain level of execution are much more a mental exercise than they are a physical task. So the thing that I've always told older fighters who are starting out is, now I'll put this caveat that as long as your body is capable of carrying the armor and swinging the sword, there's no age limit to start. There's some advantages to starting young, where you don't care whether or not you're good at something, and you don't have that, you don't have that instant need to be successful at everything you do. So there is some ignorance involved there that really, I know for me, was a big plus, because I was just like, woohoo, I get to hit people. And it was just fun for me. It was never any work for me, but that was also at a time when I didn't have a job, and I didn't have kids, and I didn't have a career, and all this other stuff, right? So when we start fighting later in life, all of those things are very real obstructions, and the time that you need to do this and do it well, that time does not exist. You don't have all the spare time just sitting around with nothing better to do with your life. You have to fabricate that time. You have to create that time out of thin air, and it can be done, and it's absolutely worth it, but it has to be done. You've got to carve out that time. But we get smarter as we get older, and that helps out in a martial art, because you get to be smarter about how you're executing, but you also get to be smarter about how you're training. One of the biggest obstacles that I've seen is something that people create for themselves, and that is what I refer to as self-imposed ageism. You get this thing where you're like, oh, I'm too old, and so they try to beat the clock. They try to train harder and go to practice more and hit harder and all this other stuff, instead of just training the best you can and being smarter about the training that you're doing, instead of trying to train it faster. The time is gone. The time is lost. You don't get that back. So you have to make the best use of the time that you do have. And if you have physical ailments, if you have injuries from previous sports or whatever, that is going to take a toll. And so you have to be smarter about what you're doing, because you can't do it harder. But if you follow a good training process, and you let the time work, and you follow the, just good instruction, you can absolutely find success in our sport later in life. But when you try to force that to happen, bad things happen, and it usually results in an injury that is going to make your path a lot longer.
Okay.
All right, Rick.
Me?
Yeah, you have something to say? I mean,
Yeah.
I know you're young and energetic.
I'm actually not that young. I actually kind of laughed when Sean said that, you get older and you care more. And I actually found the opposite. When I was young, I was a lot less patient. I was a lot less, I was more self-conscious about not being good at something right away. And I feel like as I've aged, I don't have a lot of fucks to give. And I don't care what people think anymore. And so I think that self-imposed ageism thing is a big deal. Like I see so many people say, well, I'll get an armor when I lose 50 pounds, or I'll get an armor, whatever. And I think you just need to get an armor if that's what you want to do. And really getting better is about consistency. It's not about big chunks of time. It's about little chunks of time consistently.
Yeah.
And anybody can put aside 15 minutes at night to do pel work. I used to do it while dinner cooked. And if you have kids, my daughter loves to do pel work with me. It's mommy daughter time. She loves it. So I think, you know, as you age, you're smarter, right? You're smarter about how to do things, and about working out smarter. I think active recovery is really important as you age too, though. You don't recover as well, and fighting all weekend and then getting in a car for 6 hours and going home can be brutal on your body. So I really recommend, like, you can find a supplement that helps you. Creatine used to help me, or hot tubbing, hot shower, massage, roller. I mean, whatever you find, you know, do it. Yoga
Vitamins.
is great. Vitamins. Yeah. And, you know, I think really, you know, age is all about how you view yourself. I think I'm a much smarter and much better fighter at 47 than I ever was at 25.
Yeah, I can't agree more with that. You know, I think, you know, I've been telling people I fight harder now than I ever did. And, and it's kind of funny because I think the focus and the mindset comes along with that. Right. And, you know, it's I've gone from constantly, and this is something that Ron brought up, is stay current on how fighting is evolving. A lot of us, you know, as you get older, you're like, I got my way, it worked. This is where my lane is. This is where I'm staying. But, you know, you look at any great martial artist, and they're always looking for new horizons and new education, and they're keeping their hand on the pulse of what's next. I mean, our sport is super young for a martial art, and it's still growing. We're learning how to do what we do better every day somebody steps on the field. And I think it's really important. You know, this is one of those pieces that Ron brought up to me, and that, you know, I've had people come to me and like, okay, you know, I want to change. And I'm like, how much do you want to change? In fact, one of our other coaches did that with me a long time ago. He's like, and it was hard for me because I respected him so much. It was hard for me to be his teacher because I tend to be a little bit of a hard teacher, a little bit of a brutal teacher. So it was difficult. In fact, after our first practice, I took him to the side and I said, there is no disrespect. This is just how I train, and I am feeling terribly. He's like, no, this is exactly how I want it, you know? And he changed his fighting all around. I did that to a number of people. I've changed it. You know, I worked with another great, who was already a Duke and incredible Duke in our kingdom. And he changed his fighting and won crown a few years later. And there's nothing I love more than being able to do that. And for years, I pointed at both these guys and said, I want to grow up like them, because they were able to come to somebody, tell them that they have a weakness and want to change, and be free to say, help me. You know how hard that is? That is incredibly hard when you're feeling you were on top of something. And the one thing I would say to everybody is, it is okay to do that. All of us want to help. And, you know, you still have that great history. You could have another great history ahead. But changing what you do is part of what we do, part of martial arts. And so I think that's hugely important.
Rifkin's got a really good example of that I was just talking to her about that. I don't know if she wants to cover that or if you want me to.
You can do it, because
right.
I mean, you helped him. So.
Yeah. So Rifkin's knight, Sir Timothy at Caradoc up in Ontario had been out of fighting for a number of years for a variety of reasons. Partially because he just didn't have the joy for it for a while, but he was out for 8 years thereabout. So he was out for a while, and when Rifkin started doing the winter workshops up there in Ontario and started bringing in me and Brannos and Lucan and some of these other trainers, you know, all of a sudden Tim gets wind of this and he gets the itch again. And so he came back after fighting at a relatively competitive, you know, level previous, hadn't fought for 8 or 9 years, and decided he was going to come back and do this. And that's when I started working with him. And the biggest thing that I got out of him that I think really accounted for a lot of the success that he's had since is the fact that he came back with beginner's mind, as Octa likes to say. He came back with completely blank slate, and he really threw himself into the student role and was ready to, just like to Brannos's point, he was ready to start from scratch and act like he didn't know anything about it. And because, 8 years in our sport, the sport has changed. Like it is better, hopefully, but that's part of the evolution of the sport. And for him to kind of come back and and to just kind of lay himself bare like that, and just just listen to what the new trainers were talking about, and he within a very short period of time found a level of success that was far greater than he'd had before. He ended up in the finals of On-Tier Crown, which is big deal. So Tim is one that I think, coming back to it, learning again, which is one of the other things we wanted to talk about. What happens when you take a lengthy break and you come back to this again? You're obviously older, and you've got to, and I think being able to, again, trust in the training process and just go through the training and let the process work, rather than, again, Tim had this chance to come back and, because, well, I used to be this big thing, so I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing 8 years ago when I was successful. And he was able to get a lot better by not trying to be who he used to be.
Yeah, I think that's a big point. Hey, Ron, would you like to talk a little bit about this? It's one of your points. So, I mean, we beat it up. So
I have taken a couple of fairly lengthy breaks and came back, and each time I had to adjust what I did. I mean, what I did 35, 37 years ago worked great, 1983, 4 or 5, but as I got less engaged in the SCA, I fell behind. As Rifkin well knows, face thrusts are one of the things that I really had to adjust to, because I grew up in a culture where there was no thrusting tips on broadswords. In the West Kingdom, you did not do that. And when I moved to the East, there was no face thrusting, but there's thrusting tips on swords, but no face thrusting. So I was still pretty safe. And then around the time thrusting to the face became legal in the East, is around the time I took a couple of fairly lengthy hiatuses. And when I really tried to come back, like around 2014 or so, and I was still doing well, but there was a lot that had changed, and I hadn't kept up on it, which is one of the reasons why Brannos and I did some work at the last Penzic that they held. I wasn't able to fight because of my shoulder injuries, but I was able to to spend a couple hours with them on footwork, and it's important to put your pride on the shelf and just say, this is my weakness. I'm going to, this is where I'm behind the curve on things, and this is how I'm going to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's the big piece, is that for you look at, there's a lot of great fighters out there that are in their 50s and still really on top of the game. I mean, it's most of that isn't because they're physically better. It's because mentally they understand how to manipulate and how to control a fight much better. But not only that, they push themselves to learn and constantly move forward. And those are the guys that really stand out. And I think that's the biggest benefit. But, moving on to kind of the quick next subject of age and our sport, and that is, the physical conditioning side. And I think Rifkin covered some of that, and that we have to be really careful on limitations that we have, and how we warm up and how we cool down, which if you read, cooling down for it's not as important for a younger person as it is for an older person, because that how you recover is almost based on exactly how you leave the field or how you leave your practice. If you do a cool down, you will feel significantly better in recovery than if you don't. I was just reading some stuff on this on the martial arts side today, and I was surprised what I read, and I need to personally do some more of it, let me tell you. So, let's talk a little bit about the physical conditioning. We're going to talk. I have a whole nother piece, although we'll have to get to it relatively quick, on some training methods. But let's talk a little bit about physical conditioning and limitations. Rivkin?
Sure. I think it's actually a really exciting time to come into fighting, because the culture has changed so much that it's not as brutal on your body as it was when I started, and it was learned by pain as your teacher. But I do think it's super important as you're older to make sure that you have flexibility. Yoga or Pilates or core strength, all your friends. And it's important to make sure that you listen to your body when you're fighting and when you're training and when you're doing your backup training to be able to fight. If something hurts, then you don't do it. Like that's the whole, like, I think good fighters are always reinventing themselves, right? And the whole kind of track I've taken for the last 5 years is nothing's gonna hurt, and I've never had an injury, like, ever, from the sport, because it's all for me about nothing hurts. And I think if coming in as an older fighter, you kind of take that as your manifesto, and listen to your body and do the things that you need to do off the field so that you can perform on the field, there really isn't any reason you can't succeed. So,
Sean, do you want to cover it a little bit?
Yeah, I've been, long before we started the Coach's Corner, I've been telling people, as I've been doing this for, not just older, but for a long time, I've been telling people, it's not that I'm too old to be doing this. I'm too old to be not doing this.
Bingo.
If I stop for a prolonged period of time, and this last year has been, it's kind of tested this theory a little bit. I've been able to get out just enough to kind of get back to fighting a little bit. But if I have an injury, or if I'm out of this for a prolonged period of time, fighting is a perishable skill. And my body is conditioned. I mean, I've said several times that I'm not the expert in physical conditioning. I just kind of got lucky with some of what I do. I mean, I'm doing a little bit more to get myself in better shape, but it's not really been a strong point for me ever in my career. So my body is conditioned to do certain things in our sport. I am largely a sword and board fighter. When we do our King's Champion, that's a mixed weapon thing. So we're going to do a spear tourney, and we're going to have great sword tourney. And every time I get done with one of those tournaments, I do just fine for myself. And then I'm feeling it for a couple of days after, because you're doing spear, and that uses your body in very different ways than the sword and board does. So yeah, conditioning is definitely a thing. A lot of my longevity is just the fact that I've been doing this so long that my body is conditioned to do these very specific motions, and they have been for 30 plus years. So I am a big proponent of everything that Rivkin was just talking about. And, we've had some folks on that certainly speak to this, conditioning thing much better than I do. I highly recommend that. I'm just not the person to tell you how to do that.
Ron, do you have something?
On conditioning, it's funny, when I was younger, my conditioning was my job, because I mean, when I first moved to the East Kingdom, I worked as a mason laborer for 6 months, and in a very fast moving construction site. So I mean, my conditioning was perfect when I won my first Eastern Crown. Because but as I got older, I found I had to actually go to the gym. I actually had to actually take care of myself, and it was a real shock when I hit my late 20s, and suddenly, I wasn't able to just go out there and fight all day and then be good with fighting with fighting the next day, so I mean, I'm to me, conditioning, is, unfortunately for me, most of the last year, conditioning has been basically going to physical therapy twice a week, and then doing shoulder exercises the rest of the time. But I don't have a lot to add, but pretty much that.
Well, on that point, Ron, I mean, I know your pain. In fact, I know your pain.
Oh yeah, you do better than most people.
So we had a great question. It was, what about 50-year-old fighter with a little bit of
a lot of injuries,
right? But this is that limitation piece, and
well,
right. And Ron, you brought up the limitation piece.
Yeah,
but you know what those are.
I mean, the net effect of injuries for me over the years has been it's limited what I've been able to do. I used to have a much bigger repertoire of shots than I do now, and now that my right shoulder is healing better, I'm able to bring it. I'm able to start to rebuild it. I didn't really notice it until actually Brian Terrigan pointed it out to me. He said, all you throw is a straight snap to the head, a leg shot or a half wrap, and sometimes an offside. And I'm like, I never thought about it until he mentioned it. I'm like, oh my God. And I watched video of myself going back, and the further back the video went, the more shots I threw and the more angles I threw. But the more my shoulder got messed up, my wrist got messed up, my elbow got messed up, that all kind of just chipped away at what I was able to do. So kind of how I got around that is as I'm perfecting what I'm able to still throw, and I'm trying to build on other things that my body will allow me to throw as a new repertoire. And it's been tough, but it's also made fighting interesting again. Part of what got me out of the sport is that, well, first off, life happened. I actually, had a job and a house and bills to pay. Where in my teens, I didn't. So I could go to practice 2-3 times a week and go to tournaments every weekend, and it didn't matter. But also, it just, just this, when I was a kid, I'd see these guys that became Dukes and then quit. And I wondered why would you go to become a Duke and then stop playing? Then I became one and found out why, Yeah. And a lot of it was that, I mean, in some ways being a Duke at the age of 22 is really great, but in some ways it's like you've reached the top of Mount Everest. What do you do now?
I think that's a huge thing. It's that's a whole nother different level of mindset piece. Right. Probably not this episode, but definitely an episode on its own. Right. So I think to give people an example of that, I literally I had shoulder surgery shortly after probably my first crown. So I lived with a frozen shoulder since about age 25 to probably in my late 40s. And I had 2 surgeries on it. It was the reason why I went from heater to center grip was because I couldn't lift my arm. So that's a limitation. And I got lucky. I found a person actually working on becoming a DO, and she became a DOMD. And she did something, she worked on my shoulder a very short period of time and actually gave me near full movement of it.
Right.
But it's still a limitation. But not only was that a limitation during the time in my early 20s, I have some arthritis in both shoulders. In fact, enough arthritis in my body and shoulders that I no longer have cartilage in my shoulders.
Right.
So over the last probably 10, 15 years, when they opened up to me the first time in my 20s, they were like, woo, you look like a 50-year-old. And now I'm 50. I have nothing left, which means I literally, my only option, and I've been going through this for a number of years, and this is what we're going to talk about next, by the way, is replacement shoulders. And I mean, all new shoulders, that steel joints, the whole gig. And that's a limitation too. But I'm going to tell you, I can throw, I bet you 1/10 of the shots I used to throw.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. And those tenths is excruciating pain. I can't feel my fingers after practices, everything all the way through that. And that's not from 30 years of constant practice. I'm lucky. Martial arts has always been a passion of mine. So my wife has been a saint and allowed me to carry that all through my life. I've had 33 plus years of fighting twice a week, every week, no break. Right. And another person I'm lucky to have in my life is Grace Ronald, who has done very close to the same thing. And it's funny to find, we have these limitations, but we learn how to get around them and we build. And what I found this year was there's a lot of people that we have a practice and they have bad knees or bad elbows or whatever. And just helping them realize what is uncomfortable and what is comfortable and working on the edges to build around their weaknesses has helped them incredibly. And I think that's a very important thing to take a look at where your weaknesses are and talk to a professional about how to do it. Lots of people have knee injuries, so they take care and baby their knee, but that doesn't help your knee. What you want to do is build around your knee and make it strong. But you can't do that by like, well, that means I'm going to squat 400 pounds today. That is not how you build your knee. No. You start slow and you build it so that it's not super uncomfortable to you. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but you have to keep building a little bit over time, and then you will build around and that knee will get better. Ronald has run through that a number of times in his career, and in fact just had some surgery, not because we were doing some stuff and it popped then, but it was very general stuff. But I think it's because he had almost a year off, and he, even with a very physical job of building stuff in construction business, he didn't have that time to strengthen his knee like he used to. And that's what happens. So in your age, you have to look at those weaknesses and build around them and be smart about it. Nobody knows your body. And that means the doctor and everyone else, like you know your body. And that's what you have to take care of. And you have to push yourself just to that point where you know you're helping yourself. If you're not helping yourself, be careful, because that's not going to get you where you want to go. So just be aware about those limitations. All right. They're not always lifetime limitations. You can push those things and make them stronger and make them better, but beware and understand them. So we're going to move on to the next subject real quick.
Hang on, Brannos. I got something else on.
Oh, yeah,
this.
Go ahead.
So when we're talking about kind of going back to the question, what do you do about, older people that have older 50 like me, that have injuries, that have these injuries. I have worked with a number of people who have had a problem, especially throwing a head wrap, where, the head wrap is one of the, with some of the classic ways that it was taught, that can be pretty brutal on your arm, the way we do it. And I've just run into a lot of people that have had problems with that. And they said, well, I can't throw a wrap. As a trainer, I have fixed the head wrap for a number of people who have had injuries, because again, the mechanics that I use are among other things, are very kind to your body. One of the things about how I throw it is I don't use my arm to muscle it over. I'm actually just pivoting my hand around the stick as it goes around. But it's a low impact maneuver, and I've been able to fix a lot of that for people. And really that kind of goes to the point of, whatever injury you have, there is a trainer out there who can find an alternative for what you're doing, right? Like Brannos mentioned, if you've got bad knees, you don't necessarily want to change your fighting to baby your knee, but you can also alter what you're doing to make sure that you're not putting undue stress on an already compromised joint. There's a case to be made too, that if what you're doing is putting stress on a previous injury or a compromised joint, If you're using a technique that stresses that, then you probably shouldn't be doing that technique on a good joint either. If you already have, if you have good knees and you're doing something that is, if you're moving in a way that is going to put stress on that, you want to avoid that as well. And again, I haven't had a lot of these injuries because I just, good mechanics is a big part of that. Some of it is also just dumb fucking luck. That I haven't stepped in a gopher hole at Estrella. There's a lot of just, luck that plays into my longevity, but I have worked with a lot of people that have had various injuries, and not even just injuries, but other conditioning. I was working with Rifkin's Squire Inga at Estrella one year, and I was talking to her about how I set up my basic footwork and my basic stance. And typically I do my stance with your toes pointed forward, and she can't do that because she had a lifetime of ballet that she had done. So like she's done all this conditioning that really doesn't work really well with our sport. So I modify what I'm doing to be able to kind of accommodate that. And I think there are plenty of trainers out there that can help find solutions to injuries. But it gets back to that earlier point that we're making. As long as your body is capable of doing this, then age is not a factor. You can do this as long as your body can hold up. And if you have injuries, we can find a solution around that. And I think Rifkin had a short bit on this as well.
Yeah, just super short. I think there's a difference between injury and pain sometimes. And I just want to encourage people that if you are having pain while fighting, not only can you troubleshoot your technique, but you can troubleshoot your armor. A lot of people that have back pain, when you change the way that your legs are set up, you no longer have back pain. You can change it so that your leg weight isn't on your hips, it's on your shoulders, and that changes things for you. So if you're having things like that, there's always something to troubleshoot. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is if you're truly injured, you should get professional help and take the time you need to heal, because you're not doing yourself any favors pushing yourself on the field injured.
I would agree 100%. And that's, it's not even if you're injured. If you're, there is nothing wrong. A person that's concerned about themselves, mentally, physically, take the time to talk to a professional and make sure that you're doing everything you can to make yourself better. And that it might include a nutrition professional, with vitamins and, I'm just in the last probably 3 years, I've been very focused on making sure that all my blood levels are correct and all of these, and know myself better than ever before. If I know where my cholesterol is, and I know where my vitamin D is, and I know where my all of these blood levels are, and understand myself better, I can take care of myself better and make sure that pushing forward, that I'm smarter about my own health, and I can engage with a doctor when stuff is, to ask them questions and make sure if I'm not feeling well, what might help. So be aware, these are very smart people. They know more than you do, but nobody knows more about your body than you do. So help them help you. So just want to make sure, and Rifkin, thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's super, super important. So we're going to jump to the next one, and there's probably a lot more to say about fighting because we have a lot of people fighting in that age group from 40 to 60, and even beyond. And it's super complex, just because there's lots of things we have to take care of ourselves around. But there's that next piece, and this probably could be an episode by itself. I know I'm, literally had lots of issues 2 years ago with this, and that is retiring your career or slowing down your career when you don't want to. I mean, when you're on top of something, it's hard to give away, to stop doing something that you've been doing for a long time, or something you don't even necessarily have to be doing a long time, just you want to do it. But maybe you can't anymore. And I think that's that end game is difficult. And Ron brought up one big piece in some of the points he brought out, and that is, and this is an easy one. This is a very delicate subject, and that is instructing the next generation. It's a delicate subject because when you're not fighting anymore in our sport, because we don't have this huge tradition like a lot of their martial arts, it's kind of what you do is what you can train, and so you lose a little bit of that, and that becomes difficult. There's that a lot of prove it to me type of stuff in our sport. It doesn't stop you from helping and participating and being engaged with maybe the people that were better than you or are better than you, and saying, hey, how can I help? Can I grab the new folks and run them through stuff? Can I help them understand their armor better? Can I help them just go ahead and through the basics? How about I show them my bread and butter that you think that I do better than other people? There's a lot of pieces there. And I think that's one way to still stay on the field and still help people in our sport and still be part of the community, because that's the hard part, is losing that community. Ron, do you want to, you kind of brought this up.
With the teaching the younger generation?
Yep.
Okay. I've had a good deal of experience in this. The further you are from your heyday in the sport, it seems the tougher it is to get through to up and coming fighters, because they're like, well, what have you done lately? Even if your stuff still works, that's one of the reasons why I watch a lot of video. I like to find a lot of new people, because I like to try and keep up to date on things, so I can take what I normally teach and try and adapt it to what people are doing now. It's a tough one, because in my heyday, if I told something, they're like, oh yeah, yes, Your Grace. But now it's kind of like, really? That works still? I'm like, well, it probably works better now because people haven't done this in 20 years. So they're not expecting it. That's kind of the angle I take with some of these people. But as far as your comments about, as I'd say, the twilight of your career, it's a tough thing to face. And we all have to face it at some point, that we're not going to be able to do this. I mean, as I mentioned before, I've had both my ACLs replaced. I've had a number of other surgeries done to joints. I've had a finger sewn back on, my left thumb reconstructed. I mean, I got a long list of surgeries and a long list of physical therapy, and I know it's just a matter of time before it's just going to hurt too much to be worth it to do this. But I mean, I try and make it to practice every week. Now that I'm able to actually fight again. As far as Rifkin, what she asked before we started about Crown, well, we'll see how the shoulder heals, and we'll see how my wife reacts to the idea of being queen one more time. I don't think she'd be too keen on that. Not that we had a bad time, but we were much younger then. Yeah. And there's a lot more strain now. So, but that's what I had to say on it.
All right, Sean.
Yeah, it's a question that I run into a lot. Is people get this idea that if you can't fight anymore, that you don't that you no longer have a contribution because they can't actually do it, and that is just I don't think that's true, and I think that's something that we kind of need to kind of start kind of doing away with the idea that I mean I've seen a lot of older knights who think about retiring their belt or resigning their chivalry because they can't do it anymore. And I don't think and I don't think it's fair. I think we need to, I mean, where would we be without the people that came before us?
Yeah.
For starters. And, even if you are medically retired for whatever reason, there's a lot about our sport that can be taught that you don't actually have to be in armor to do it. And I think I think that is going to be more relevant as time goes on, because we are training our sport better now. And I think, you know, when my time comes, you know, some 30 years down the road still, as far as I'm convinced, I keep thinking that I haven't hit my prime yet, but, you know, I still think there's more for me to do. I think I can be a better fighter still. But when the time comes when I can't do this anymore, the work that I've done in changing how we teach our sport and teaching people a learning process and teaching better training methodology, like, I mean, that's what the Coach's Corner has all been about, is finding a way to teach our sport better. And I think as we age out, I think we are going to need more coaches on the sideline. And I think those people are going to become more relevant because we're teaching people how to learn our sport, even if the techniques change throughout the years. I mean, if you think about just like every other sport, you know, how many players go on to then be coaches later. And of course, it's a lot of the bench players that end up being some of the best coaches. You know, it's not your star quarterbacks. You know, Jason Garrett was the coach of the Dallas Cowboys until recently. He was backup quarterback to Troy Aikman. So sitting on the sidelines and watching all this happen, those are the guys that are going to become better coaches and are going to continue to have that contribution to make. And, you know, I mean, I say this as somebody who is going to, I mean, I'm going to fight the Reaper as long as I can. I'm going to keep doing this for as long as I can, because I mean, I've loved this from the first day that I saw it, and I really don't want to age out, but it's going to happen eventually. And, you know, hopefully when that time comes, I'll still be able to, I'm very confident that I'll be able to make those contributions long after I can actually physically do it.
Yeah. Rivkin.
Yeah, I'm with Sean. I don't think I've reached my prime either. And I don't like to think about aging out either. But what I do want to say is I think we could do better as a society in valuing our older members and our members that can no longer fight anymore. I think sometimes we don't give them the respect, and the people don't listen because they're like, I've never seen that guy fight. And so what does he know? And I think one thing that the pandemic has taught me, and doing a whole bunch of interviews has taught me, is there is a lot of knowledge out there with people that have been doing this for decades. And we should listen, and we should let them know that we value them and that we want to keep them around. I know how hard it is to go to events and not fight when fighting's your main thing. But there's so much more that you can offer the society through your knowledge and your teaching and your coaching, and even if you can't get on the field. So I am going to make an extra effort when Ontario finally opens up again to get like Duke Thorne out, and some of the other guys that were really important to me, who haven't been playing as much because they're older and you know, they aren't on the field as much and they don't feel relevant. I just want them to know you're relevant. You're totally relevant.
Well, I'm glad to have you here with us, and able to communicate that method, you know, that mentality, because I think it's super important as well.
Yeah.
I think as someone getting there, you have to be open and aware to what's coming, and be okay with people. But, you know, it definitely is important to recognize those that have laid the groundwork and the path, and you know, like Sean says, that some of the greatest coaches that ever exist in boxing, some hardly boxed at all,
right.
But boy, their knowledge of understanding of that game and how it's built, and their eye to the game is incredible. We're gonna jump into the next subject. This next subject is mostly about Viscount Tristan kind of threw this one out there, and you guys, if you go to SCA Coach's Corner, you're going to see a video about just a short talk about flow training, and and it was hard because I listened to that. And I'm like, I'm pretty hard, like just grind it out. I mean, Rauokinn, you've been to Sundays and you know it's pretty much a grind, you know, grind
3
it
hours.
out.
I was in pain.
But I think on the other part of that is what I also is important to me is that consistency of constantly doing it so you get your hours in. And if you get a chance to watch the video, I'm going to cover it a little bit here, but the video talks about flow training where it's like, hey, when you first start, and this I think is important for a lot of people first coming back after all of this time off, is don't run to a 10 and then be out for 2 weeks because you're sore than hell. And then next time you fight, you're going to run to the 10 and get your hours in and your intensity in, and then you're going to be sore for a week. And then you're going to run to the 10, you know, because as we get older, we can't do that. And even when you're younger, it's hard to do. And what flow training talks about is run to the 7. Run to that point where it's just below that place where you're going to abuse yourself that you can't recover tomorrow. Because if you can put in the work every day, the idea is if I put in an hour every day and I run to that 7, I get, 7 hours a week. If you run to the 10 and you can only put 3 days in a week, then you get 3 hours a week of training. And intensity is a different style of training, but that constant thinking about what you're doing and understanding and that running through your head and seeing that fight 7 days a week, that 4 extra hours makes a huge amount. I can tell you I'm not that way, but I listen to this and I watch because they talk about the Eastern Europeans doing this and the Cubans doing this for boxing, and they absolutely do this stuff. And you look at it's like, well, where the Russians run all of the heavy steel stuff over there, and and they even mention it as like, well, they're they state sponsored and all that other crap. But in the end, those guys are mostly foam all the time, and they have some steel, and then they go right to their events. And we see that they actually even transition a lot of other sports, including professional football, the same way, where you're not going super intense, but you're just like, you're able to work through a practice and work through stuff, have a little bit of fun, but it's this like constant engagement. So you can constantly learn. You're not abusing yourself physically, so you can't do it again tomorrow. Because in the end, and we talk about this, the more time you have in, the better you become. And so, this is something to think about, especially as you get older. Come in, do what you can, come back tomorrow. Do it a little bit more, come back the next day, do it a little bit more until you're at that point where, your normal is higher than maybe a lot of other people's intense day. And I think that it really kind of rang a bell to me, because that idea that you're getting more hours in is the key. And it has to be quality hours. In other words, I'm still engaged in practice. But those more hours mentally engaged in practice make up the huge amount of difference. And we talk about that. It's like, how did you get knighted in 5 years? Well, I attended three, 4 fight practices a week. And I did that for 5 years and I was knighted, Well, that guy who did that is spending, our fight practice, let's say they're 2 hours or 3 hours long, he's getting a lot more than the guy doing it once a week. And that guy may take 10 years to get knighted. But, if you look at the hours, well, maybe they have the same number of credit hours, it's that kind of thing. And so if you get a chance to take a look, it's Joe Rogan's video online, and it talk about a little bit, it's a short one. It's just like maybe 20 minutes of talk. Maybe less, mostly covered in the MMA, but makes a ton of sense. Take the opportunity to watch it. It's good stuff. I don't know, did anybody else get a chance to watch that that got posted? If you haven't, take the opportunity, because I think the big part was the idea that you push yourself and that you're constantly there. You're constantly able to think about it. Because really, the biggest part in our game is if we're constantly thinking about it, And you can see this when you're really engaged, right? It's like, okay, what can I do next? And even if you're not physically doing it, if you're mentally engaged, then your fight becomes better because you're still thinking about it. And I think that's where his videos go to. And a huge shout out to Tristan for posting that, because it was a good place for, I think, people to start to think about how they train. And I think that's an important part if you're going to start late, how you train. Maybe even who you train with. Maybe even, you know what, you're an adult now. You may be older than the guy that you're going to want to train with. and maybe that means, hey, this is the commitment I can give you. Walk into practice, work for a while, and then go to somebody that you're like, that's what I want to do. Go to them and say, hey, this is the commitment I can give you. I want to do this. And as an adult, you know, that's easy to do. As a younger person, that's harder to do. But guess what? You started in your 40s. You're an adult now. You can make that decision and follow up on it. And I think that's one of the advantages of being older and starting. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
So one of these things that Brannos is talking about here is, you know, if you're going to more practices and you're going to more tournaments, that's what Duke Uther out in the West refers to as fighter math. You know, if you're doing, you know, one practice a week, you're not going to get better as quick as somebody who's doing 2 practices a week in addition to training every day. The basic formula that I've always used for success in our sport has been training once a day, practice once a week, and a tournament or some sort of evaluation once a month. You know, fighting once a week is a minimum. It's one of the kind of benchmarks that I look at for how engaged somebody is in our sport. Ask yourself you know, COVID years notwithstanding, but ask yourself, when was the last time you fought 52 times in a 1-year period? And how long within a 1-year period does it take you to get to 52 times? Because that's an average of once a week. If you're going to practice once a week and you're going to a tournament even once a month, you know, you should be hitting those numbers. And it's not an absolute. You know, it's kind of one of those things where, you know, fighting once a week is not a guarantee that you're going to get knighted, but not fighting once a week is kind of a guarantee that you won't. But that's a pretty basic baseline for how active somebody is. But yeah, if you're doing it to an extent, if you're doing it more, you're going to get better faster. But if you're doing it so much more that your body can't recover, then you're going to be injuring yourself doing it. 2 times a week is good. 3 times is a lot. 4 times is right out. That's just way too much fighting. Your body doesn't have time to recover from that. One of the other things I wanted to kind of mention about what Brannos was talking about is, like, if you're constantly going at a 10 and that's the only speed that you have, and that's always you're always trying to fight at that intensity, you don't really learn how to be able to compete at that level. When I talk about practice, I actually have I distinguish 2 different levels of practice. There's deficiency training, where you're taking the time to run through and get better at the things that you need work on. Ideally, you're going to have a partner or a coach that is, you know, this is beyond drills, but it's something that your coach is going to be creating situations that allow you to work on these things that you're not good at. After you've had some time to work on those things and get better at that, at some point you have to do sparring. And you have to do sparring outside of a tournament environment. If the only time that you are taking to compete in a tournament environment, or to be able to execute the top fight that you have, if the only time you're doing that in tournament is in tournament, you're dealing with a lot of the emotional components that really make tournament combat difficult. This desire to want to do well, this idea of I've got to win so that I look good, and all these other things. You have to do sparring so that you know what your body feels like to just execute at you know the full potential. and so you have to do that at practice so that you can do that without the emotional side of the tournament, because the emotional part of tourney is exhausting in and of itself. And that's something else you have to work through. But the more you can do this at practice and just do sparring, the easier that becomes. To Brannos's point, and you know, to the point of the video too, the more you can do that in a practice setting where you don't have to deal with the emotional component, the easier it's going to be for you to simply execute when you do get to a tournament. And being able to execute at that really kind of mitigates that emotional component as well, because it's just another Tuesday.
Ding ding.
Right? We're executing just as we execute on a daily basis. But you have to make a distinction between deficiency training and sparring. And sometimes you have to very clearly state to your opponent, okay, now we are doing sparring. And when we're doing sparring, it's just fight. Just go.
Okay, I just want to add something really short because I know we're running out of time. But for me, it's all about setting yourself up for success and making sure that what you decide to do is sustainable. There's nothing worse than, you know, making this big plan for yourself and, you know, you miss one and you've got, oh, I'm not perfect. And so you throw it all away. So perfection is dumb. You need to set yourself up for success, do things that are sustainable, be consistent. I always tell my students, it's quality over quantity. And there's this whole thing, I don't know if it's just on tier, but first on the field, last off the field. That's dumb. You need to listen to your body. And when you stop having quality fights or quality sparring, or your brain is full, you need to acknowledge that about yourself and take a break and write down what you learned, whatever. And don't let people push you into overextending yourself, because that's dumb too. So that's what I wanted to add.
All right. So we're kind of running against the wall of time, and we pretty much covered the points that we wanted to cover. Thank you guys for everything here. I think the key is going to be I hope everybody got a little bit out of this. I think we have to focus on the young. We have to focus and be smarter when we're older. And we have to appreciate what people gave us. And I think those are all huge things. Sorry, I'm getting a refill. And good squires, I'm telling you. I think we covered those pretty well. Keep an eye on the SEA Coaches Corner for great stuff like Tristan posted up. We'll have lots more videos out there talking about that. Just a quick note, Brannos Saib added another 70 or 80 fighting videos to our database just last week again. So there's new content out there and always new content coming. I'll probably post up a little bit of some of the ones that came that she added so that people can get a feel for it. And huge thanks for her for kind of having that online database. I know we get tons of great feedback on that. Sean, you know what we got next week?
Yeah, so next week we are doing an episode on creating a class, how to teach a class. We talk a lot about different training methodologies and some of the things that we need to think about as trainers. But you know, there's a lot of people out there who are thinking about teaching a class and haven't done it for the first time, or you know, one of the big things that we run into that I think that we're starting to focus on changing is, you know, this idea that you have to have certain, you know, accreditation or qualifications to teach. Obviously, we don't want people teaching garbage, but if you think you have something to teach, there is a process for how to create a class and how to kind of structure the class that you want to teach. So we're going to be going over some of that a little bit to encourage people who have perhaps never taught a class before to get out there and teach and share what you know, and to kind of give you some organization tips on how to do that and some of the things to think about as you become a teacher and sharing what you know.
So huge thanks to everybody who participated, including all you folks online, because you really, I mean, for us, this is another way for us to help people, and it's what really fills our heart. Rauokinn, thank you for joining us as a coach. I know you've been on a lot of episodes already. I also know you have a very full schedule, but I'm so happy that you actually decided to go ahead and become a full-time coach here as well. We'll also have Sir Bess, Viscountess Bess, Elizabeth out of Eldamere has also we've added her as a coach. I'm looking forward to hearing her talk about the things. She was on just a few weeks ago, and she thinks a lot different. I mean, the good part about Bess is she's a really kind of she thinks a different way than some of us, and she really brought a lot to that episode. So I'm really looking forward to that. Ron, as usual, thanks for the content. I think it was a great show, and thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks.
So, Sean, as normal, look forward to always talking with you and seeing you.
Always.
And everyone, hey, keep your eyes forward. Things are changing. We're coming alive again. Let's take everything we got to learn over the last year plus, and let's start this back up and make it bigger and better than ever before. I mean, that's all I can say. We're all smarter now. We all understand. We've had great episodes by so many great different people, and almost every one of them's come down to how much they love helping others, and I think that's really shows the core of what the SCA is, and we have to bring that forward and make it better than maybe what it looks like now, but make it even bigger and better than before. And I think we're trying to provide a way to help people think outside the box and try to recruit and help people join what we do even more in the future. And that future is here and now. So thank you again, everyone. Rauokinn,
as always, Vesper.
Yeah, Vesper. She didn't turn her video on. Oh, there she is. She's coming. And there's our great host. I can't say enough good things about Vesper, but she said, okay, enough. I'm tired of hearing it from you guys. It's this constant. So, like once a week is fine. You don't have to thank me every day online or anything. But me and Sean, we're a little crazy about the Vesper.
Yeah, we really appreciate everything you do, as always. As always.
Thank you, guys. Hope everybody has an amazing week and amazing Memorial Day. So we will catch everybody on Friday next week.
Awesome. Right. Everybody stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
All right.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.